So, I have a bit of a project I'd like to tell you about. First of all, for a bit of context, I really love Japanese literature. Two of my favorite authors of all time, Osamu Dazai and Yukio Mishima, were both Japanese authors. So I am forever chasing the high their books made me feel. One thing I am lacking though is contemporary literature. In general, I tend to pick up classics over contemporary books. But recently, I somehow really got interested in Ishiguro specifically. I like the premises of some of his books. I know Never Let Me Go is completely loved by basically everyone, it feels like. And so I got the urge to pick up his books. And I don't know how this happened, but I somehow ended up with a stack of many of his books. This may seem excessive, but knowing the reader I am, I do tend to like reading several works by the same author back to back. Even if I don't like the first few books, if there's something about the author I find interesting, I tend to want to read everything I can get my hands on from them. And I'm very confident that I love this one. So I did buy quite a few of them. So long story short, I decided to focus on this pile of books over the next few weeks. And I'll document my thoughts for you. I don't really have a plan of how I want to read them, in what order. I'll just sort of go by feeling and we'll see. I am the most interested in an artist of the floating world because one thing about me, I absolutely love art and I love books that talk about art. And so the chances of me loving this book are quite high. Also, it's stunning. Look at this. It's one of my favorite covers of all time. I think it's so brilliant. I don't know how well this comes across on camera, but the colors are so vibrant. It's incredible. So, yeah, I don't know why. I haven't really heard anything about this book, but art is really the main selling factor here. So I will pick this one up first and we'll see which one I feel like reading after. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into reading this book. It's a bit later and I've read up to April 1948. So this book is set in Japan, starting out in the year 1948, and it's shortly after the Second World War. We follow this elderly man who has recently retired from a career as a successful artist. He's called Mr. Ono. And he begins by telling us about the stunning house he lives in. He tells us that the only way he could afford this stunning of a house is because he basically won it through a contest. The book is written in first person and it primarily deals with Mr. Ono, the artist, and his family life, as well as the repercussions of the war on his family, on himself, and on the society he lives in. The first time the war is really mentioned in the book is when we get to see a part of the house he lives in that has been destroyed through it. Another depiction of it is when we follow Mr. Ono to a bar he frequents, and through his eyes we get to witness the changes, because he remembers the way this part of town looked like before the war, lively and colorful and full of people and very busy. And then after the war, where it's basically just ruins, completely destroyed, and the bar he frequents is the only one still left because the owner hasn't given up yet. Through the people he interacts with, we also get to see a very wide variety of effects the war had on these individuals. On a domestic level, we get to see primarily him and his daughters interacting. It's fairly clear from the beginning that there are some tensions. It's very ambiguously written, so I don't know yet what exactly is going on, but there seem to be some tensions. The elder daughter especially seems to be very withdrawn, whereas the younger daughter is more outspoken and lively. We also get the idea that the elder daughter is married and has a son, but the younger daughter is still not married. Big deal at that time. And there seems to have been an engagement in the past that has fallen through, and there's all this mystery around that. I don't know in what way this is going to come into the story later, but I thought it would be fun to mention. I won't spoil anything, so don't worry. This is something you learn in like the first few pages, so you don't have to be concerned. What I've been noticing about this book is that it provides a fairly significant insight into several generations of Japan at the time and the different attitudes they had towards life and especially the war, because we get to see Mr. Ono interacting with his children, with his peers, and we get to see his memories from the way he interacted with his parents. And so that is a very fascinating contrast. They do have very differing standpoints towards what is happening at the current moment. The part that I liked the most was on page 78. Mr. Ono has this conversation with a man he seems to have worked with as an artist in the past. It talks about art, and there's something mentioned in it that I've never thought about that way before, where he basically says that no self-portrait can be inherently accurate, in the sense that no matter how honestly an artist tries to depict themselves, they will never be able to see themselves the way other people do, and so the portrait will never be representative of what other people see in that person. And this is such a fascinating concept to me, because I know that in art there's this thing where if you paint portraits, you basically paint yourself into those portraits. That was a familiar concept to me, because I've noticed that in myself when I try to paint a portrait, I tend to paint characteristics of myself into them without noticing them. But to see it done this way, this was a concept I've never heard of before. And I thought that was so fascinating, and it's something I've been thinking about since I've read that passage. So there we go. We'll see if that'll be topped. I'll go and read some more now, and we'll see when I update you next. So, we're joined by Blue again, who is the clingiest little dog ever. I love it. But to the point, I finished An Artist of the Floating World. Overall, I really liked it. It compiled some of my favorite things in literature, which is a very simplistic but poetic writing style. Also just themes of art, which I can never get enough of. And I really liked how quiet the book was. I really love books that really just are a slice of someone's life. And Ishiguro does something in this book that I thought was very nice, which is he basically takes this slice of life of the main character, and he makes it a symbol for the larger happenings in Japan at the time. But still, it's a very quiet book. It deals with the destruction of the war. It deals with grief, with change overall, with the differing generations and what that means for a society. Can you be quiet? I'm very sorry if you can hear that. But although the themes can be hard at times, it's not a tough book to read, because Ishiguro doesn't linger on the difficulty of it all. He just creates this really quiet slice of a man's life who is trying to deal with all of this change and who remembers the past and contrasts it with the present. Something that I did notice though is that I didn't really connect with the main character at all. This is not something, I don't need a character to be likable, but something about the main character rubbed me the wrong way. He was constantly being portrayed as this humble man, but to me, a humble person doesn't constantly talk about how humble they are. And I don't know, something about him, it's not anything obvious and it's never stated, so I don't know if that's something that was intended or if I maybe just didn't connect with him. But that's not the point anyway. The story was still very good, it's just something I noticed. Another thing that's very consistent throughout the story is the subject of influence and the different influences we experience throughout life. It's talked about in part by mentioning the influence politics has on the people of a society. Mainly though, influence is talked about in the context of mentorship, because obviously Mr. Ono is an artist, a successful one at that. So it's specifically mentioned in the power dynamics between an artist and his subjects. There is also the whole question of whether art is political or should be political or not. Another thing is this book is quite random in the way it's told. Mr. Ono is an elderly man, and throughout the story we learn more about his situation in life and why he may be behaving and thinking the way he is. But he will sometimes just randomly in the middle of a conversation skip to something that happened previously and then abandon that thing completely and skip back to the present. So it's not a coherent storyline in that way, which I found very engaging. Overall, it's not going to be my new favorite book of all time, but I think it was a good introduction to this author because the themes were accessible and they were things I like anyway in literature. So I really do look forward to the next one I read. You can't really see them, but here's the stack. And I think I've decided I want to read The Unconsoled next, simply because it's the longest and I think it'll be nice to get out of the way. That's how I tend to operate. The ones that are the most daunting to me, I want to get out of the way so that I'll gain confidence. Because after that, they're all fairly short in comparison. But besides being a long book that I'd like to get out of the way, I do find the premise very fascinating. It seems abstract because it's about this man who comes to a town he doesn't know to give a concert he doesn't remember agreeing to giving. I have no idea what's about to be told to me in this story, but I'm very interested to find out. And yeah, we'll see. This might take me a while, so I don't know how I'll go about updating you with this one, but we'll see. I am very excited. So yeah, we'll see each other soon. I'll start reading this book now. Bye-bye. I don't know what's going on. Maybe I didn't wash my hands enough, huh? Okay, so I've been reading reading the Unconsoled, duh. I don't have a bookmark in this currently, but I'm exactly on page 200, so that's not very hard to keep track of. I do have some initial thoughts. First of all, the premise was basically what this book was. It's a man, Mr. Ryder he's called, who arrives in a hotel lobby and he has no idea where he is, he has no idea why he's there. And the story is told in a really weird way where he has no idea what he's doing, but he's too proud to admit it because everyone around him treats him like he remembers everything. So he's too proud to admit that he doesn't. And therefore, we're just as confused as him because he could just tell someone, sorry, I don't remember what happened to me. But he doesn't. So we just keep being confused. And so far that hasn't stopped. Reading this book, I keep thinking about The Double by Dostoevsky. I don't know if anyone else feels that way, but I think they feel incredibly similar because in The Double too, you're constantly wondering, is this a delusion? Are we in reality? And the people around the main character in both cases just act like everything's normal, but they act in a way where you never really know if they're part of the delusion or if they're just normal people and the main character is the only one who's a bit cuckoo. And yeah, I don't know, but the abstractness of it all, the fact that it feels like a complete fever dream, like you're just constantly confused. You're right, Willow? You're right. Hey, book. Within the first pages of the book, you get the idea that he's a renowned pianist and that is why he's there. He's there to give a concert and he's being treated like a complete VIP the entire time. Not only is the story incredibly weird on its own, but the characters act super strangely as well. Sometimes they don't act like normal people. The narrative is constantly cut off. You'll be in the middle of an action or in the middle of a conversation, and suddenly, because you're in Mr. Ryder's head, it skips to like a day after, but there's not a paragraph separating it. It's just the next line, he's suddenly doing something completely different. And so you're constantly, it really feels like a dream where you are in a situation and then suddenly you're portaled into a different situation. And yeah, so that sort of is really disorienting sometimes. As the reader, you really have to suspend your disbelief, otherwise you won't be able to read this story properly. Also, something that's strange is The Unconsoled is told in first-person narrative. We're in Mr. Ryder's head and we're experiencing the story through his eyes. But then sometimes he'll have an interaction with someone. For example, this happens very early on in like the first or second chapter where he has an interaction with someone who's employed at the hotel. And he doesn't know this person, at least from what we know. But then suddenly you're in the head of the person and you're in second person. And Mr. Ryder basically tells you the intimate thoughts and feelings of this other person who apparently is a complete stranger to him. Also, something that I don't think will take away from your reading experience, because is it really a spoiler if it happens in the first 20 pages of the book? Especially for a book that's as long as this one. But some of the characters in the story who live in the town he's not supposed to know interact with him as though they've known him. And there seem to be some personal relations going on between him and characters who live in this town. So it seems like he's been there before. I can't really say if I'm enjoying it or not at this point. It's very interesting and it really reminds me of some of the more abstract stories of Dostoevsky and especially Gogol. Gogol is really similar to this because his think of The Nose by Gogol. That is the most fever dreamish story I've ever read. So I keep thinking about those kinds of authors. Also Bulgakov. Bulgakov also, Master and Margarita. Yeah, this is sort of similar, just in the general confusion of it all. It's the kind of story where you get to constantly create theories about what's actually happening in the story and what things might mean. But you also, because it's such a long book, have to really keep an open mind, because if you view the story through a theory, then you might miss things or you might interpret things wrongly. Maybe the author intended it to be something completely different than I'm currently thinking it is. So in that sense, it's an engaging story. I don't want to put this book down because I want to know what happens next. Okay, so I'm gonna keep reading now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, 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 bye-bye. Hello again, everybody. It's much later, and I have finished the Unconsoled. And I thought it's such a nice sunny day, so why not film this final thoughts portion of the video outside? Because we all need some sun in our lives once in a while. As for my final thoughts on the Unconsoled, I feel a bit conflicted about the story because it is well written, and I did find it fascinating to read. I didn't want to put the book down because of how it was written, and it is meant to be disorienting, so being confused is the whole point of the story. The ending, I thought, was well done. It wasn't what I was expecting. I thought it was going to go somewhere different, but now that I've had some time to think about it, I think Ishiguro did something very well with it. The part I feel really conflicted about when it comes to this story is the fact that I felt really stressed reading it. It wasn't a pleasant experience because this book felt like a very specific kind of horrible dream. I don't know if everyone has these, but I have them often where you know you have somewhere to be or someone is waiting for you or you have something planned, but things just keep getting in the way of that. And so you never actually manage to do the thing you set out to do. And throughout the dream, you just get increasingly more stressed. And that's exactly how this book felt. Also, the characters are miserable. They aren't happy people. And the fact that they never communicate and that they're really mean to each other often, they all just sort of seem really messed up. And especially, God, the thing that really, really rubbed me wrong was the way they treated children in this book in general, because you get to see several generations interact with their children, and for some of the characters that are grown-ups during the story, you get some flashbacks to how they were treated as children and how that affects the way they parent as adults, and it's just horrible. There's especially this little boy who just, I felt for him so much, and the adults in this book were not adulting. Let's just say that. I think this is the kind of book where I'm glad I've read it because the concepts are fascinating, and thinking about it afterwards is gonna be the best part, I think. But the actual experience of reading it wasn't very nice. So yeah, a fascinating story, a very unique story, a disorienting story, but not the most fun to read. I do, however, recommend it. I think there's a lot to be thought about in this book well, I don't read much contemporary literature. I was going to say it's the most modern version of a Gogol or a Bulgakov or a Dostoevsky or some Dostoevskys, but I can't say that because I've not read enough contemporary literature to claim such a thing. But yeah, it did remind me of those. I talked about that earlier. I like to do this thing where I pick out my favorite quote of a story. Sometimes that's really difficult if there's a lot, but for this one, there was really only one. It's on page 418. The quote goes, I have this feeling that all it will take will be one moment, even a tiny moment, provided it's the correct one. Like a cord suddenly snapping and a thick curtain dropping to the floor to reveal a whole new world, a world full of sunlight and warmth. How fitting in this type of weather. That, I think, is all I had to say about this book. So now let's get into An Artist of the Floating World, because as you saw, I did also read that one. I did kind of already say everything I had to say about this book. But yeah, overall, it was a nice story. If I had to compare the two, I enjoyed the experience of reading An Artist of the Floating World more than the Unconsoled, but I think I will think about the Unconsoled more over time. I think that story will stick with me more. But An Artist of the Floating World I liked because of the themes of art. That really was my main factor of enjoyment. As we're on like quotes I liked, I thought why not read this one to you as well. The quote is basically Mr. Ono, the main character, talking to his grandson, a little boy, and the little boy asks Mr. Ono about this man he knew who died. And he asks him why the man died. And we find out that this man was a musician who produced some songs that during the war was sung a lot by soldiers. It's just another way Ishiguro talks about the destruction of the war and the influence it had on all of these people who were innocent. And this connects to something else he talks about in this book, where through another character, it's basically discussed that wars are fought by civilians, but they are created by governments. So the people who die and who suffer aren't actually the people responsible for anything, and how paradoxical that is. So before I can read you the quote, I have to give you two details. First of all, Uncle Kenji is Mr. Ono's son who died in the war, and he talks about Uncle Kenji in the context of the soldiers who sang these songs that this musician made, and the musician himself is Mr. Naguchi. The quote goes, "And the likes of your Uncle Kenji sang them when they were marching or before a battle. And after the war, Mr. Naguchi thought his songs had been, well, a sort of mistake. He thought of all the people who had been killed, all the little boys your age, Ichiro, who no longer had parents. He thought of all these things, and he thought perhaps his songs were a mistake. And he felt he should apologize to everyone who was left, to little boys who no longer had parents, and to parents who had lost little boys like you. To all these people he wanted to say sorry. I think that's why he killed himself." What's really interesting though, and this is something I noticed about Ishiguro, his stories, at least the ones I've read so far, tend to be very dark, but the way he writes them, he doesn't linger on the emotion. All of the tragedy and all of the emotion sort of happens off page. I think that's really powerfully done. There's, for instance, Kawabata, who I absolutely love, who also does this. His stories are tragic, but also very quiet and simple and understated, even though some of the things the characters go through are objectively really, really sad. And I think Ishiguro might be another one of those authors who do that, which, if that's the case, I'm really happy about, because those tend to be stories I really like. That's kind of it. I'm very happy you joined me on this adventure. I'm gonna go a little further into the woods now because it's such a nice day and this sunshine needs to be appreciated more. So yeah, that's it from us. Yeah, Willow, exactly. We're gonna say bye now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Yeah.